Hello, everybody. Welcome to another review. Today I'm talking about Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, the latest film entry into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think it's actually number 25, which is so bizarre to think about. And they've got like another dozen already like announced and ready to go. So I actually saw this a couple weeks ago. We saw it basically right when it came out, but I haven't had a chance to sit down and talk about it till now. And obviously, these reviews are a little bit different from the ones that I do for the TV series where I can easily watch it, rewatch it, take some notes and go from there. This is mostly notes of things that I was thinking about, during the movie, things that I thought about after the movie, and then stuff I've been thinking about since then. But I wanted to talk about it and kind of, this is the first MCU movie that takes place fully after the Infinity Saga. You had those first 22 movies up through Endgame, Avengers Endgame, and then you had Spider-Man Far From Home, which was kind of an epilogue, at least for Peter Parker, as to what the aftermath of that is like for the world. And then we had Black Widow, which, while it is obviously one that has been released after everything else, it takes place during the interim between Captain America Civil War and Avengers Infinity War. So this is the first one that actually takes place mostly fully, after the Infinity Saga has come and passed. Apparently, this was actually something they were trying to get done in the 80s with Brandon Lee in the main role, long before the MCU was ever even remotely a possibility. And this would have been back around the time that they put out Howard the Duck. So it's not all that surprising that things didn't really go according to plan. But yeah, this was something that they wanted to do for decades, and it was actually during the original pitch internally with Marvel Studios and getting that all set up back in 2005. Shang-Chi was on the original list of 10 properties that they wanted to adapt. I don't know what the other 9 were. I would assume Iron Man and Captain America and the Hulk and those were all in there, but Shang-Chi was among those. I had to. It still is a little bit awkward to say Shang-Chi because for a long time I was saying Shang-Chi because I saw it in text and it didn't occur to me until a couple months ago. I was like, I haven't thought about the fact that maybe it's not pronounced like that. I'm not really sure. And I was like, a lot of times it's more of an ong sound for names like that when it's Chinese. And then lo and behold, so the main character, Shang-Chi, goes by Sean, and they even make a joke about it. Sean to Shang-Chi is not that far of a difference there. But yeah, so I will do my best to pronounce it correctly. I hope I don't slip up on that. But right off the bat, I have to say that the acting in this movie is solid across the board. There is acting that I don't like, but it's not bad acting. So that's a distinction that I have to be able to make here. The acting is solid across the board. There's this actually really spectacular pedigree of actors just all over the place for this. I'll start with Shang-Chi and Katie. They're kind of our main two characters of this whole thing. So Simu Liu, I stumble over that. I stumble over Liu because I think of Lucy Liu, who might also be Lucy Liu, but everyone knows her as Lucy Liu. So Simu Liu, as Shang-Chi, is a really I really like the character that he's got for this. He's a very approachable sort of he's a very down to earth kind of normal guy. And he has kind of a very different take on the MCU hero formula, where he's more of reluctantly oh yeah, I just kind of have to do this, and he's been in hiding this whole time, and it's kind of a weird inversion of the secret identity trope. Whereas you have Peter Parker, who no one can know that Spider-Man is Peter Parker. Instead, we've got Shang-Chi as Sean, and he's just trying to escape from his past, and he just has this. He spent 7 years being trained as basically an assassin for the Ten Rings, and he's just got these skills, and he just eventually has to use them because his father has sent men to come collect him and his sister, which is a whole thing as well. But the acting is really solid. He seems very not tired exactly. He's got this kind of I guess reluctance. It's this sort of, it's not a hero's journey kind of thing. It's more of he was told, until he was, from the time he was 7 till he was 14, that he had essentially this destiny, but not like, oh, you'll be a great hero and you are destined to save the world. It's like, you're going to take over the family business kind of thing. Like, you're going to be, maybe not even that really, but just like, you're going to be, part of this organization, and that's who you are, and that's what you're going to do. And, going on missions and all these things. And he's like, nope, don't want it. Don't want any part of that. So it's not so much like a rejecting the call moment, so much as like, nope, I want no part of my dad's bloody history, and spends his time trying to lay low, while most of the rest of the MCU's heroes are kind of living their dual life, not in secret, but just like, yep, here's my day-to-day life, and then I go and do heroic things also. And I think that's just kind of a nice change of pace. The MCU, for the most part, has kind of avoided a very common superhero trope of like, oh no, the superhero secret identity. Like, they even kind of make fun of it at the end of the first Iron Man with like, oh, here's your cue cards, here's, everything you're going to say so that they don't know that you're Iron Man. He's just like, I'm Iron Man. I don't give a shit. Like, that's me. Let's not bother with the formalities here. So this was kind of a similar thing, though. At this point, nobody, by the end of this, it's not like people in the overall just world know who Shang-Chi is. But the heroes of the MCU do. They know who he is. So he kind of has, it's not even like a superhero secret identity, it's just the dual life aspect. Like, he is now a hero, a superhero even, but it doesn't impact his like personal life, at least not yet. We also have Katie, who is his best friend. He's good friends with just like her family in general, and she does a really good job as the audience surrogate. So Awkwafina playing Katie. I was kind of worried early on that she was going to get like really annoying or like a little too like overly jokey and stuff, but they actually do a really good job utilizing her as a character, both in terms of being the audience surrogate. Like, you for movies that have kind of a high premise or a fantastical elements or a new world kind of setting, you do need at least some approach to explaining how things work to the audience in a way that feels organic to the story itself. Like, nothing is more painful than, here's the general and he's talking to the lieutenant and he says, now, as you know, every year we have these military training exercises. And it's like, yeah, no shit. Those characters know that. It doesn't need to be explained. You're explaining it for the sake of the audience, but you're doing it in a really clunky way. Here we have a character who knows fucking nothing about any of this stuff, who's having it be explained to her by characters who are from this like other world, or from Shang-Chi, who has this like personal history that needs to be gone over. They do a good job of making his history. So I'll come back to Katie in a second, but they do a really good job in this movie of weaving the history of Shang-Chi, like his personal history, through the narrative of the story. And they actually do the same thing with his father, Wenwu. Both of them, their personal stories are woven through the main narrative, and there's a lot of flashbacks, a lot of kind of parallel action and things that, are impacting today from 7 years ago or from 14 years ago or whatever. And it was at a point where it actually felt, it reminded me after a certain point of the movie Hero with Jet Li. And that's important to remember, and we will come back to that. And those of you who like keep track of actors and their histories and stuff will already know where I'm going with this. But for those who don't, hang tight. We'll come back to it. But yeah, the movie overall had did a really good job of having her be an effective audience surrogate to learn these things organically through other characters, while also giving her own arc. A lot of times, you'll have side characters in these movies who don't really have an arc. Iron Man 1 had both Pepper and Rhodey, and neither of them had any real like arc or thing that they were doing. Even like Spider-Man Homecoming, Ned didn't really have an arc. He was a lot more. He felt a little bit more meaningful in the second movie, and he had his own like little character like mini journey. It was almost tongue in cheek that he was having his own arc, kind of mostly off screen. But like, so it's not super common in these MCU movies for a secondary character, or not even secondary, but like the deuteragonist, I think is technically what the term would be, have their own journey. And she does, because at the start of it, she has no ambition whatsoever. Shang-Chi and Katie, or Sean at the time, and Katie are valets at like a hotel, and it was kind of a weirdly long, like drawn out shot of some other, Asian guy stepping out of a really nice car, and then, pan over to Sean and Katie, who are like, that car is fucking awesome. Oh my God, we're going to go drive it. And yeah, like she has no real ambition in life. She even outright like owns it a bit. Like her brother, she like, makes jokes with her brother. Is like, yeah, you can do nothing like me. Yeah. And we kind of discover over time that it's kind of a defense mechanism, that basically she doesn't really have confidence in herself or her ability to do anything. And it's sort of a cold feet situation where anytime she starts to feel like she might be getting good at something, she like panics and bails and like, nope, I'm gonna get out of there. And it winds up kind of becoming a thing for her in the end, where she, perhaps a little bit too fast, but it's also one of those things where time has passed in the end. There's a stretch of time that we don't really know how long it is, where they are in, oh no, I forgot Talo, I think is the name of the village, Talo. It's probably not Talo, and I'm so going to say the wrong thing for this entire review. I think it's Talo, but they're in Talo, and she learns some like archery skills and stuff, and she's, even at the start, she's like not that bad at it, and then she gets better at it, and she winds up actually being really, really useful during the final battle at the end of all of this. So that was really cool to have her actually have her own arc alongside Shang-Chi, who is trying to come to grips with his history and his past, and there's a very like Sins of the Father kind of vibe with him, where he's trying to define himself outside of being his father's son, and in a way, away from being his mother's son too. Like he winds up learning her form of martial arts from her sister, his aunt, but he's kind of making it his own thing, and it's kind of a nice like blending of all of these together. And actually, this is a really good segue to talk about Shang-Chi and action in this movie. The action sequences in this movie, at least in the first half, are awesome. These are probably the best hand-to-hand combat sequences the MCU has seen ever at this point, across 25 movies. The two that jump out to me the most are probably the two that everybody talks about, which are the fight with Razor Fist and some Ten Rings on the city bus, and then the fight with the Ten Rings on the scaffolding on the outside of the skyscraper. I guess it's in China somewhere. I forget exactly where that was. I think that was at the fighting ring. And both of these are really interesting because they're very 2D action sequences. You're on the bus, which is for the most part just a straight line and and just enough space for you to like stretch your arms out and be barely not touching the windows of the bus. So there's not a ton of depth, of three-dimensionality to it. And the same goes for the scaffolding, where it's mostly just a big, Donkey Kong set of platforms. Not even platforms. It's the like poles that connect the scaffolding. There's for some of them there are boards, but for a lot of them there are none. It's just the metal poles connecting them all. So you wind up with these very two-dimensional fight scene locations, but they do a lot with them. You've got Shang-Chi kind of doing these like run along, the wall of the bus kind of things. And they play with, the little rubber separator in the middle of the bus that lets it do turns easier. That's kind of what those are for. He winds up on the top of the bus, and he actually does his own stunts, at least a few of them, including probably the most dangerous one, they were saying, is near the end of it's fairly near the end of the bus sequence. There's a point where Shang-Chi's on the top, and he does a little butt slide, little like baseball slide maneuver to the front corner, grabs onto the rear view mirror, and grabs it, swings down, and slams into the door of the bus. And that is all practical. That is one shot, and that is actually, it's against a blue screen, but that's Simu Liu doing that. And word on the street is he fucked up his knee pretty badly because he just kept doing the stunt again and again and just wanted to do it more and more. And he kept slamming his knee into the door. So he was just like, nope, we'll do it again. And it was like a grapefruit by the end of it. But yeah, it's the fight scenes in the beginning half were really, really good. It was a very like the Raid style like intensity. I wish they didn't cut as often as they do. They don't cut like ridiculously often. Like you can compare to a lot of a lot of American like post-born action sequences are very like cut heavy, and there's a lot of like jumping around, and usually the idea is it's there to mask it's either there to mask cuts that they needed to do because the stunt was just like kind of tricky to pull off, or they're trying to hide cuts so that they can change actors' makeup so that they look like they're really getting beaten up. Sometimes it's because they don't really know how to choreograph and plan the camera moves, and so having really close-up frenetic cuts makes it feel more frantic and more crazy and stuff. This one does it less than those, but I still would have liked to see a few more longer takes, because those are really like, you go and you see an action movie, especially a martial arts one, if there's a lot of cuts, bouncing back and forth, and you're seeing someone do stuff, and every time someone gets hit, the camera jumps to somewhere else, it stops feeling very impressive. But if you have those long takes, if you have those really long sequences of like, and I say really long, but like 15 seconds, of this like choreographed thing, and there's 5 dudes, and they're all like, whoa, getting up, and they go in, and they get knocked out again, and all this stuff, like, that can look really impressive. And this movie does have a few of those. I wish it had more, because it's done so well, and so much better than it's historically been done in the MCU, that I just wanted more of it. I'm hoping what this means is that any future movies that have Shang-Chi in it are going to have some of these extended action sequences. But yeah, I would say that it generally is really good for those. The style of it was really nice. It has a very modern martial arts feel, compared to Wenwu, who has a couple fight scenes that take place in flashback and some that take place in the present. And the ones that are in flashback have a very, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, wuxia, I think is like the kind of, Chinese martial arts movie style of fight sequence. Very flowy, very kung fu, very I don't know how to describe it, but it's a very theatrical look to it. And again, reminds me a lot of Hero. And maybe part of the reason for that is because I'm going to say this wrong too, Tony Leung. I always thought it was just Tony Leung, but Tony Leung, who plays Shu Wenwu, actually plays Broken Sword in Hero. And it took me a minute to like connect those two dots, and I was like, oh, this is great that he's doing this style of fight again, because if you haven't seen Hero, surprise, this review is also kind of a backdoor ad for Hero from 2002. Oh boy, that's an old movie at this point. Old movie. But very good movie, and a very like beautiful presentational. I was going to say performative, but that doesn't feel right. Presentational, theatrical kind of I don't know how to describe it. It's really beautiful, and the action sequences have a certain stage action presence to them that's hard to describe. And we have a sequence early on where Wenwu and Ying Li, his eventual wife and the guardian of Ta Lo, are having a fight scene, and it is so beautiful, and it's so well choreographed, and we're seeing that in the beginning, he comes in with a lot of just brutality and force. his thing, and you see even further flashbacks of him fighting armies across the centuries. He just kind of uses the 10 rings as big fists, big stone fist power things. He occasionally does like blasts of energy. He really loves a whip. He really loves like a big energy whip with it, but he will often just use it for big punches with a lot of force behind them. And he winds up doing the same thing against Ying Li. And she does the very kung fu-y, like, nope, just very like flowy kinds of moves, just kind of just gracefully moving out of the way, turning his energy against him. And there's even there's a really, really like, it seemed a little bit cheesy and on the nose when they did it once, but it comes back. There's a point where he goes to do a move, and he's like using all his force with all the rings on there, and she just grabs his wrist and kind of pulls it behind him and kind of gets, I think, a hand behind his neck, and they just kind of spiral around each other for a minute, and you get a close-up of him being basically like pushed really low, like she's got him down here, and he's kind of looking up at her, and he can't help but start to smile, and she's looking down at him very seriously, just kind of like she's probably enjoying this to a certain degree as well, but she's like, well, I'm still dealing with an intruder. It does come back in a fight scene near the very end where Wenwu and Shang-Chi are fighting, and Shang-Chi gets him in a very similar hold. But this time, he's got him pressed down like this, and Wenwu is furious and looks a little beat up and is just, like, pissed off that he's being held down like this. And then Shang-Chi is just kind of, like, sternly looking down at him like, nope, this is how this is going to go. But, yeah, so also, I've been saying Wenwu. I've been very careful to say Wenwu and not the Mandarin. This movie had a lot of difficulty in the script department, not necessarily like in terms of how the script wound up, but like in the planning stages, they explicitly decided that, so in the comics, Shang-Chi is actually the son of a character called Fu Manchu, who is an extraordinarily racist stereotype, a product of its time, and Marvel has all but abandoned it for pretty obvious reasons at this point, and they're like, no, we're not doing that. We're not gonna have a fucking Fu Manchu as in this movie. And so the next they decided essentially like, okay, we'll make him the son of an existing character, a different character from Marvel Comics, known as the Mandarin. And the Mandarin is a different character in the comics from Fu Manchu. He is again, kind of racist, stereotypish sort of character. I haven't really kept an eye on the character lately. I think they've made some changes here and there. But the Mandarin is an Iron Man villain in the comics, and arguably like one of the biggest ones for Iron Man. It's been a question since Iron Man 1, and it's like, oh, he got kidnapped by the 10 rings. Oh man, does this mean the Mandarin is going to show up at some point? And I think they were actually considering either for Iron Man 1 or 2 to have the Mandarin, like unironically the Mandarin as a character, and they were like, let's not do that. So there's the 10 rings in Iron Man. Then we get around to Iron Man 3, where the Mandarin is after him, but it's actually a fake Mandarin, Trevor Slattery. And then you've got Aldrich Killian, who says, I am the Mandarin, but like more as a facetious kind of like, he invented this character of the Mandarin in order to create the fictionalized warlord that Trevor Slattery played. So he's just kind of like owning essentially the operation, basically, as like, I am the Mandarin, I am all of this kind of thing. When you get to the Marvel one-shot All Hail the King, Trevor Slattery is in jail, as is Justin Hammer. They're both in jail together. And Trevor actually gets captured by the 10 rings. Someone shows up under the ruse of doing a documentary, and instead it's a guy with a 10 rings tattoo on his wrist, I think, or his arm, and they break him out of prison so that, because it's like the real Mandarin is pissed at you. There was also I want to say one of the bad guys among the group of goons in Ant-Man has a 10 rings tattoo as well. So they've been around. They're around doing these things. But Wenwu is a guy who has gone by a bunch of different names over the centuries. I forget how long he's been at it. But he started out as a Chinese warlord. And sorry, there's something in my teeth. He actually kind of made fun of the fact that, like, yeah, I go by many different names. Someone even decided to use my name to in terrorist stuff in the United States. They're also scared of an orange. Like, it was just kind of an interesting little, like, jab at the whole thing. But also, they basically were like, okay, Shang-Chi is not going to be the son of Fu Manchu. And he's not really going to be the son of the Mandarin. He's going to be the son of the person the Mandarin was a stolen kind of identity from. And Wenwu does not like the Mandarin moniker at all. So I think they did a good job of kind of avoiding some really nasty pitfalls by using Fu Manchu or the Mandarin as an element of this. I think that would have been to their detriment, and this feels a lot more natural as a result. They actually and the gang that shows up. So after Wenwu winds up falling in love with Ying Li, they wind up getting married, being together, having 2 children, and eventually, while he's out, his past comes back to haunt him, and a group called the Iron Gang shows up and kills Ying Li. She, I think, mutually kills all of them, but is killed in the process. And I was kind of wondering if the Iron Gang specifically, is them kind of doing a little offhand reference to the Mandarin versus Iron Man in the comics by having Wenwu's wife be killed by the Iron Gang. I don't know if that was intentional or if it's just a coincidence, but it just kind of stuck out to me there. This movie is as much a story of Wenwu as it is of Shang-Chi. It's really Shang-Chi, Wenwu, and also Katie gets a pretty good piece of it too. But Wenwu is a very compelling villain ? He starts his life as objectively villainous, but when he falls in love and has a family, he legitimately does put that life behind him. For 7 years, he puts the 10 rings away. So the 10 rings, among other things, grant the user immortality while they're wearing them. So he's been alive in the same age for centuries at this point. So he finally decides, like, hey, this is someone and this is a family that I could grow old with. So he puts them away, and it's this really sweet, like, it's not for nothing and it's not fake. It is him actually putting that life behind him. And it's only when his old life comes back to haunt him and forces him back into, this life that he puts them back on again. And we don't really find out until later that I don't think he puts the rings back on because of this, but once he puts them back on, he starts hearing of voices. And the voices sound like Ying Li, his now dead wife. And it's a voice beyond a door in another dimension that is begging to be freed, and only the 10 rings are powerful enough to free it. And he basically becomes this very manipulated figure. It's interesting in that he is both easy to manipulate because he's emotional, and he thinks that there's a way to bring back Ying Li. He's been convinced that she has been trapped, that she's been imprisoned in Ta Lo. And he demands to get back into there to find her and free her, and he'll destroy Ta Lo if he has to in order to free her. But that's the thing, is he's very easy to manipulate because he's emotional, and he's also very useful as a weapon because he is so strong with the 10 rings. And it's a very compelling sort of situation where he is a villain, but he's not a bad person anymore, really. So it's this really conflicted. If anything, I feel like the audience is designed to feel more conflicted about it than Shang-Chi does. Shang-Chi is pretty relentlessly like, nope, this is gonna end, and it's like, okay, all right. I mean, talking with him a bit more may be useful, but But yeah, I thought that was Tony Leung does an incredible job. Just completely owns this movie. He is like the guy as far as like, Asian actors go. He is way, way up at the top of like just, the most popular and the most famous, and just the fact that the MCU managed to get him at all is unreal. And he brought every ounce of his acting chops to this, and it shows, and he did an incredible job. On the flip side of things, so there's a lot of stuff dealing with the 10 rings, and we do actually follow up with All Hail the King, because in the basement of Wenwu's, homestead, like the Shu family area, under what is once again a 10 rings compound, Trevor Slattery is downstairs, and he's just kind of there. It was neat to see him, but he's incredibly weird in this movie, and he's kind of insufferable. And I say this as someone who really, really liked him in Iron Man 3, and I'm one of like 5 people who actually goes to bat for the fake out in Iron Man 3. I thought that was awesome. I really liked that. I thought it was a great call. I thought it was an awesome idea, and the execution was fun. I liked that plenty. Here, I can't fucking stand him. He made perfect sense as this dopey, druggy, drunken mess in Iron Man 3. And it's like, if he's just kind of like sloppy and fucked up, it makes sense that he's not going to be very bright at the same time. But here he says that he was in prison, so he kind of had to go clean, and they weren't going to give him much stuff in the 10 rings. And so he's stone sober, and he's still very loopy. Maybe not loopy. He's very dumb. He is not very bright. He thinks that the apes from Return of the Apes were trained to ride horses, except he realized one day that it was fake. And everyone in the car is like, oh, okay, so you knew that the apes were actually... And then he finishes the sentence with like, pretending to ride horses. And it's like, what the fuck? No one is this stupid. He's just kind of a big fucking idiot in this movie. And he serves a purpose to the plot, but then he just sticks around. Like he's just there for the rest of the movie. He's part of the team. And it's like, okay, this needs to stop. This is ridiculous. It's nice that we've got Morris, the Hundun, a cute little faceless, fuzzy pig-like creature from Chinese myth. I believe it's an actual Chinese myth. There's actually a lot of those in this movie. There's a lot of the entirety of Ta Lo exists in a dimension asterisk that seems to be populated entirely with creatures of Chinese mythology. You've got all sorts of things, and they're actually they're designed in a way, it's really incredible. The artists in this movie did a bang-up job, because so many of these creatures simultaneously look like paintings of these mythological creatures while also making sense physically. Like, you've got these lion-like, griffinish sort of creatures, and their manes are kind of like spiky. Like the hair is in like little points and things, but it's all together very wavy, and it all makes sense, and it looked great. It looks awesome. I don't know, as the MCU goes on, they're doing the thing that almost is impossible not to do when you delve into this stuff, but it's starting to get very confusing what the difference is in the MCU between a dimension, a timeline, and a universe. The way that I usually distinguish those, generally speaking, a timeline would be, like different timelines would be the same world, but there's a point of deviation where a decision makes things different. A different dimension or universe would be something where just the rules of how it works are completely different entirely. If I had to determine what like a dimension versus a universe, I guess like a universe would probably operate by mostly similar rules, but it's a more broadened generalized deviation than a different timeline would be. Whereas a dimension would be like completely different, maybe even incomprehensible. So we've got stuff like Dormammu of the Dark Dimension in Doctor Strange. that makes sense. He comes from a dimension where just none of this like it's a completely different thing. We go in there and it's almost incomprehensible how it all fits together. But then we've also got the dimension that Ta Lo exists in, and it kind of just feels like magic China, like a magical version of China. And maybe that's the case. Maybe it is like like a full dimension, but there's a door to it. There's a passageway to it that just exists. And I will point out too, the way that they travel into it, it just suddenly there's this vortex of water. And while we were there, I was like thinking just like, wow, that actually kind of reminds me of the sling ring, like transportation of Doctor Strange and all of those. It's kind of interesting. By that point, we'd already seen a cameo by Wong and the Abomination of all things. That was a real strange one. And it's implied that Wong has been training the Abomination to fight. It's very confusing. I'm curious if the Abomination has been settled down to basically have Emil Blonsky's rational thoughts back as opposed to just being a bloodthirsty monster. But Wong is in the movie, and they even leave in like a sling ring portal and all that. So regardless, so I'm a little confused on how the dimensionality thing works. And then so they go to Ta Lo, which might be a dimension, but then there's a door to another dimension where all of these dark creatures that I cannot for the life of me remember the name of exist. So I'm a little confused on how dimensions and all of those work. Also a little confusing is the Ten Rings organization itself. So I'm trying to imagine if Genghis Khan had gangs in the 20th century. Like that's kind of how this thing works, is that that Wenwu has this global terror organization. Like they're not so that's not even entirely accurate. He's essentially got his Chinese martial arts warriors, but they're not really like. I don't know how to approach this because it's a strange concept. It's a tough one to get behind. It would literally be like if Al Qaeda had street gangs and also like Bond style spies and also ninjas, while also having insurgent organizations and stuff. Like it's a strange concept to wrap my brain around. But also, he gave up his organization in the 90s. He gave up that life. Did he give over the organization to lieutenants, or did he dissolve it, or what? And then in 2003, he starts it back up again. Is he fully back in charge of the 10 rings by the time 2008 happens, or 2010, whichever year that Iron Man 1 now takes place in? Was he in charge of the 10 rings enough that the chunk of them in Afghanistan would have been under his control when Tony got captured? Or was Raza the actual leader of the 10 rings at that point, just from Afghanistan? Then did he reboot the organization really fast? Now at the end of the movie, also 10 Rings has been reborn again, this time under Shang-Chi's sister Xialing, which is a very weird thing because it's not like she's exactly like a great person for most of this movie. She runs and owns this like super fighting ring, and in the end of it, she kind of merges that business with the 10 Rings. So now she is in charge of that organization, and it literally ends with the 10 Rings will return. I was like, oh, okay. So this was kind of them rebooting the 10 Rings also, so that it has a second wind in the MCU. So that's going to be kind of interesting. There's also the 10 Rings themselves, the actual artifact. They're very interesting. So they do something that I really like in that they tend to extend and enhance the energy of the person using them. So when Wenwu is using them, they're very forceful, very blunt, very harsh. He has his energy whip and all of these things, and he fires blasts with them, and it's a very like concussive, forceful thing. Whereas with Shang-Chi, by the end of the movie, kind of claims them, at least in part, and then Wenwu actually gives them to him. And when he's doing that, they're much more flowy. They're much more airy. They're kind of, they feel like they're a very wind and water elemental kind of thing compared to Wenwu's fire and earth, if I had to place it, So that's just kind of an interesting aspect of it. They don't really. So there's this energy thing. They also grant the user immortality, which is a somewhat overlooked thing there. And also there's the question of, okay, well, what if you had one ring on? What would that do? Would that make you age slower? Would it give you the full immortality? If 10 people each had a ring, would they all have immortality? Would they all just age much slower and live to 250 years? There's also a visible difference in the fighting style of Shang-Chi and Wenwu. Like I was saying, is he's very forceful. Wenwu's very forceful. Shang-Chi is very flowy. And that's kind of another thing where earlier in the movie, Shang-Chi is very forceful. He's very blunt, and he's very quick and sharp with his attacks. And when he tries fighting Wenwu in that same way, he gets decked. Like, Wenwu is just better at that than him. But Wenwu's weakness has always been that he's kind of the powerful, big glacier style thing where maybe that's not even right, but he's trying to hit so hard that he leaves himself open to other attacks. And if you dodge him, he can't do a lot about it. So that leaves him vulnerable there. So when Shang-Chi starts using Ying Li's fighting style, which is a lot more evasive and a lot more of a counter strategy, Wenwu gets his ass kicked. They also, as we learn in the end, are sending some sort of beacon. There's some kind of signal going on. And we get this really cool scene at the end in the post, I think it was in the post credits, where Shang-Chi is basically summoned by Wong and brought to the Sanctum Sanctorum, where we also have holograms of Bruce Banner and Carol Danvers, where they kind of lend their expertise to try to analyze the 10 rings. And they're like, this doesn't come from anything in space. I don't see any gamma radiation. There's no infinity stones doing anything here. This is totally unrecognizable as a material, even. They don't even know what the hell it's made of, but it's sending a signal to something. And there's a lot of possibilities here. Could it be something that belongs to one of the versions of Kang? Is it something that's going to lead to the Fantastic Four? Is it some other thing entirely? There's a lot of potential options here. I'm very intrigued. It feels like the MCU is desperate to get Phase 4 moving. The TV shows are doing a decent enough job, but the movies haven't really started yet. So it's come on, go. And we have this movie that's kind of removed from everything. But at the very end, they're like, oh, by the way, something's going to happen here. So unclear. Maybe they'll do a Fin Fang Foom thing or something. I don't know. The pacing was very interesting in this movie, I have to say. The very beginning was very fast-paced. There was a lot of action sequences, a lot of escapes and fighting and all of these. And then the ending was it was a mix. The first half of the ending had a very, it matched with the rest of these as far as like a lot of martial arts. The second half of the ending was a lot more of an MCU fantasy thing. We haven't seen an ending quite like this either, but it's basically Shang-Chi and Katie and the others in Ta Lo and the 10 Rings fighting against this horrific dragon thing, who had a name, and I do forget it, unfortunately. And it was a very different style from everything. It looked really good. There were a couple spots where the CG was a little bit rough, or some of the post editing they did on some of the characters moving around was a little bit less great, but it was really impressive nonetheless. The middle, 50% of this movie, and it felt like 50%. The movie felt fine overall, but the middle half of the whole thing was very deliberate and slow, lore-filled, explanation-filled. We get a lot of backstory, and it did a good job of building up tension, but it also did start to feel after a while so when's the thing going to happen? All right, we're learning about Wenwu. We're learning about Ying Li. We're learning about the 10 Rings. We're learning about the Secret Forest. We're learning about Shang-Chi's past. We're learning about the dragon. We're learning about all these things, and it's great, but it's okay, then what? We gotta get moving. But let's see. I have my notes are mostly organized, but I got a couple things off on the side. Oh, I have to say, so Xu Xialing, the character that is Shang-Chi's sister, was played by, I swear I looked this up, Meng'er Zhang, I believe is how her name is pronounced. This is her first Hollywood role. And when she auditioned, she had absolutely no idea what she was auditioning for. They wanted someone who could speak Chinese and English fluently, and I think that they were looking for someone with fight training, at least a bit of it. And she auditioned and she won, and then she got a call basically from Disney, and she was like, "Well, wait, what?" Like, kind of blown away for that. But yeah, she had no idea, and she got the role, and she did great. She was awesome. I don't love the fact that they gave her Janet Van Dyne, Hope Van Dyne's wig from Ant-Man 1. But otherwise, it was a solid role. She did great. I'm looking forward to seeing her as the head of the 10 Rings going forward. Apparently, she got married to one of the action designers for the movie that she met while working on this one. So, like, that's pretty cool. That's awesome. Congratulations to Meng'er Zhang. Oh, yeah, Tony Leung, one of the more interesting things here, too. So, just kind of looking him up, I'm like, all right, what's some things that people are going to recognize him from? One is Broken Sword from Hero, obviously. One was he was in a movie called Internal Affairs that was so popular that it got remade into The Departed. And his role was the one more or less that got played, I think, by Leo DiCaprio when it got made over here. And The Departed is obviously also a very popular and accolade-heavy movie. You can look forward to seeing Tony Leung in Once Upon a Time in Hong Kong, coming soon. Not to be confused with Once Upon a Time in Hong Kong, starring Tony Leung in 2021. There are two different Tony Leungs starring in two different Once Upon a Time in Hong Kongs this year. That was a very confusing thing to sort out. It was a little bit hard to understand how that worked, but there are some tie-ins. I already mentioned Bruce and Carol, and the MCU is kind of revving its engines and all of this. Bruce's arm is in a sling when he's talking with them, and I have to imagine that Bruce would either A, eventually his arm would heal, or B, if it doesn't heal, then like he would do something other than just having a standard medical like basic sling, and he would do something else with it. But so maybe this is like pretty shortly after the blip. It's a little hard to say. They don't really place it exactly. There are posters all over the place for stuff involving the blip, though, so I have to imagine it was at least relatively recent. It's incredible timing, too. The snap, the blip, whatever you want to call it, is kind of taking on its own. It basically exists as this anomalous event in the world of the MCU that is so analogous to COVID in the real world, which makes it very easy to draw allusions from one to the other and have them immediately be recognizable. So it's like, self-help group, not self-help groups, but like, groups for people who are like struggling in dealing with the effects of the blip. That's definitely a thing that exists right now. Therapy sessions and things are all the rage. It's just like, it's an interesting thing how that just wound up inadvertently getting its own shorthand in the real world and vice versa. So, I love the joke where, Carol Danvers has to disappear for unknown reasons, and she's like, "Oh, I gotta take care of a thing. If you need anything, Bruce has my number." Bloop, and she's gone. And he's just like, I don't have her number. I don't know what she's talking about. Which might have been kind of an offhand like joke. It might have been improv, or it might have been her joking about them kind of making a joke about the fact that there is a beeper, a pager, that will contact her, but maybe Bruce just like forgot about it because he was there when they did the beeper thing. So I don't entirely know what, if he forgot about it or what, or if it got destroyed. I don't know, but they can get a hold of her if they need her. Another fun one is Lil Nas X confirmed to survive the snap since Old Town Road was released between the years of 2018 and 2023. And they sing it during karaoke, which they eventually get Wong to join in on at the end, which I thought was it's like such a Wong thing to jump in on that along with them. And I thought that was a great little bit there. But yeah, I really enjoyed Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would, and I thought I was going to enjoy it plenty. So this was really good. It's definitely, I think, the best origin story we've had in the MCU in years. And the action sequences were incredible. The acting was fucking awesome. There were some pieces that I didn't like. Trevor Slattery is now, I'm like, oh, we've resolved this. Can we please be done with him? But all in all, I really like this movie a lot. I think it was great. I think everybody should go see it. It was a great time. I would give this an 8 out of 10. I think that's a pretty solid. It's one of my favorites right now, actually. It's not like at the top, but it's up there. It's pretty far up the list. And you know, it's great to be back to the MCU because Black Widow did not feel like we were back to the MCU. It felt like, you know, it was a side story that honestly could have been a Disney Plus thing on its own, or it could have, it's a shame, but this one felt really great to see in theaters. And I am excited to see where they go with Eternals next. Eternals. This is one everyone has been talking about, Eternals, which is wild because it's a group that I know almost nothing about. But everyone even remotely associated with it and everyone behind the scenes and like through the cracks we're hearing, it's like this is like gonna be a big one to go see. And it's the longest MCU movie outside of Endgame at present at 2 hours 36, I believe. It's a beefy bastard. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if if Eternals is what's actually setting up like the main villain of Phase 4 if it's not going to be Kang. So, yeah, I guess we'll be coming back for that, and we'll be coming back tomorrow for another review of What If. I believe we're looking next at What If Zombies. So that'll be fun. I think that's the one that's next. I'm realizing as I'm saying this that I'm like, yes, What If Zombies is next. So that'll be our next one there. So thank you very much. I would love to hear what you thought of the movie. I'm sure that there are things that I've left out that I should have talked about. I would love to hear what you thought about this episode, and I hope to keep entertaining you with these reviews and stuff. Yeah, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.